Nick Jenkins, previously a dragon on Dragon's Den, he founded Moonpig, which is now valued at just under $1 billion, and he is a world-class marketeer.
It's much better to teach a mathematician how to be a marketeer than teach a marketeer how to be a mathematician.
An entrepreneur who needs little introduction, and so in this wide-ranging interview, we touch on what will Nick do when he eventually grows up, deciding when to jump, the marketing secrets of Moonpig, how to break through the clouds and into the sunshine, how to scale employees, selling Moonpig, what the entrepreneur community could do better, and so much more. So please enjoy this wonderful, wide-ranging interview with the one and only Nick Jenkins. What are you going to do when you grow up?
It's something that you always need to keep slightly ahead of you, because the moment that you stop having plans and dreams and aspirations for the future is the moment when everything just becomes everything just starts to shut down. And it's one of the and you have to frequently reinvent yourself. I've had several different careers. I had a career as a commodity trader in Russia, so for a number of years I was Mr. Russia, or my friends knew me as Mr. Russia. I lived over there, worked over there, had a very exciting job over there. And then I came back, and then I started Mr. Moonpig, and then I spent a long time in the charity sector after that, after selling that. So I've had a number of different incarnations, and I quite enjoy that, the reinvention and learning. I think that if there's one thing I have learned along this whole journey is that you never get bored of learning new things.
Aside from ski instructing, what would you love to learn next?
I spend a lot of my time looking at renewable energy, and one of my plans at the moment, or one of the things I'm trying to do, is to build a digital model of energy in the of world energy. Just because I'm just fascinated by it, and I love there's a lot of maths involved in that, and I enjoy learning about that. The other things I like to keep my languages up. The piano. I mean, there's so many things. I just don't have enough time in the day really to be able to do the things that I'd like to keep up.
So if we wind back the clock, going back to Russia.
Yeah.
You arrived in Russia, I believe in 91 at the August coup.
1990 I arrived in Russia, actually.
1990.
1990. I spent a year working there before the coup, and then the first coup happened after I'd been there for a year.
Okay. You were there when Gorbachev was arrested. You were there at the end of the Soviet Union. You had tanks rolling past you into Moscow. What was that period like? But more specifically, what did it tell you about human nature?
It taught me a lot about history. I studied Russian and Soviet history when I was at university, as well as language. And when you read about the Russian Revolution, you often tend to think of the entire country being in uproar, that everybody rose up at the same time. The truth is, in these situations, you realize, and I reread the history of the revolution after having seen the coup, and realized, no, actually it was quite small. At first, it was quite small. It was just around the Central Telegraph in St. Petersburg, and it was just a few people involved. And it actually took quite a long time before the revolution had really made its way through the country. So things don't happen overnight, and so that was it. Put an interesting light on rereading history. It was fascinating to see, because there won't be another political upheaval like that for anyway. One of the most important, biggest countries in the world, most powerful countries in the world, completely changed its political system in front of me.
And not just the political system, but beforehand, there weren't any private companies. And I remember listening to you on a different podcast saying that rules were invented overnight. Everything happened very quickly.
So when I first arrived there, the only type of commercial enterprise you could have was a cooperative. And you were only allowed to employ members of your own direct family. So that was how limited it was. They didn't have private banks. They didn't have private insurance. They had to make up a lot of that on the spot. So they're very bright people, very well educated, and they picked it up very quickly. But gosh, they had to invent a lot at the same time.
It's a lot of change that a lot of people have to go through, and change is the only constant in life, but specifically in entrepreneurship. What did you learn from that period that you then applied into business?
It's difficult. I think from that that period, I learned about employing people and bringing teams together. So I started from scratch. I went out there on my own, and the opportunity, really, I went out there at the time of the Soviet Union to be a conduit between my company and the one person in the Soviet Union who dealt with importing sugar. As the Soviet Union collapsed, suddenly the rules just went out of the window, and we could deal with anybody. So I ended up setting up a trading operation over there and hiring a bunch of people. I think when you're very young, and I was in 22 when I went there, you just think all things are possible, and you just get on with it. So I hired a bunch of people, and we set up a business, and before we knew it, we had a very thriving sugar trading business over there, with spreading all the way out across to eastern Siberia, and Kazakhstan and Georgia. So it was. I think perhaps one lesson I learned is about hiring people, hire good people, let them get on with their job, and then the other thing is it's about taking decisions, and the ability to take a decision is one of the most important things I think that in being an entrepreneur. A lot of people can analyze things and give you several choices, but at some point you just have to say we're going to do that and take a decision and move on and not overthink it. So I think to some extent it's the courage of taking decisions that defines success.
I love getting very practical on this show. So is there a approach or framework or technique that you apply to making decisions either effectively or quickly?
I never really thought about it that much, but I think it's about working out when have you got enough information to be able to take a decision without wasting too much time and overanalyzing it. Rather like standing on a high diving board, you can spend an awful lot of time thinking about it, but the truth is at some point you're going to have to jump. And really, there isn't much more information to have. You know how high the diving board is, and you know it's probably going to hurt when you hit the bottom. But people will stand there vacillating quite a lot, thinking about it. Why are they thinking about it? It doesn't make any difference to the dive. The same with business decisions, that you will get. You need a certain amount of information, and there's some information you can easily gather, and there's other information you'll never get, and some information will take you too long to work out. Like market research, for example. I could have done much more market research on Moonpig as to whether or not people would like it. On the other hand, rather like this, when Sony brought out the Walkman, they didn't do any market research at all. They thought, just chuck it out there and see what people think. So I think that's the decision-making process is quite simple. You just work out what's the optimum time at which to take a decision. I think I've got enough information to take a decision. Let's just do it.
Can we bucket information into these different categories? Information we can easily get, information takes a long time to get, information we'll never get. Let's start with the never get. What sort of information is just
well, you'll never really know. For example, when I started Moonpig, I never really would know how people would perceive it in the market. Can't find that out until you try it.
And what's the information that takes a long time to get?
Well, you can overanalyze things. I mean, you could interview, you could do market research with 10,000 people. It's not going to take you much further than interviewing 10. So you can just push it too far and spend too long gathering too much information, spending too much money gathering information. You just need enough to sort of bare minimum to think, can I take that decision?
And figuring out how much information is enough is kind of an intuitive, learned over time skill.
Yeah.
You also have said before that business is common sense dressed up in jargon, and that most people overcomplicate things in business. Is there a specific area you've recognized lots of entrepreneurs overcomplicating?
I did an MBA after I left Russia, and in the MBA you absorb vast textbooks of strategy and so on. And of course, if you want to sell a strategy textbook, you've got to make it sound complicated. But in truth, a lot of it is, if you distill it down, a lot of it is fairly instinctive and doesn't need to be dressed up in jargon. I really don't like business jargon. When I hear people spewing out Porter's 5 forces or whatever, it just makes me think you're just trying to tell me that you've read a book, and I'm not impressed by that. I'm much more impressed by people's experience, and people tend to lean on jargon as a way of trying to demonstrate their experience. I'd much rather they just spoke in plain, clear English, because I always think with communication, the most important thing is is not what you say, it's what people understand that matters. That's about communication. It's about what you take away from it, rather than what I say might sound very very eloquent, and you come away from it thinking, I have no idea what he actually said, but it sounded very eloquent. What matters is what you heard, what you understood from it, and speaking clearly and simply is an important part of that. And so every area, whether it's marketing or strategy, they develop their own little acronyms. They develop their own and their own phrases for things, their own slang. And some of that is I think is part of people wanting to be exclusive, wanting to exclude other people from their area. We are the experts in this. We know all about marketing. And so we're going to speak in a way that you don't really understand. And you'll think it's some kind of voodoo and some kind of magic that only we understand. In truth, it's quite simple, I think.
Can we go into the simple truths of both of those?
Well, I recently, having gone from a B2C business, I went into a B2B business, an enterprise SaaS software business. And I came in as chairman, and I was thinking, gosh, it's not an area that I understand that well. And until I sat back and think, let's just go back to basics. Okay, so who are we trying to speak to? How many people are there that could possibly buy our product? Let's start with that, right? So, and when you think of it like that, nice and simple, there are probably 400, 500 people who could buy our software. So, well, let's try and work out who they are. I mean, you can identify all the companies. You get a list of all the companies that exist in the UK by size, sort them out, have a look at them, think, could they possibly use our software? If they could, well, let's have a look at them. Let's dig around. So now you've got a list of 500 people that you need to speak to, and look at what's the most efficient way of trying to speak to them. And suddenly, if you think of it, it's basic, really, isn't it? And we often know that trying to make a cold call often doesn't work. But there are lots of different ways of getting yourself heard about, and then being able to make an approach. And then when it comes down to it, what do you want to have as a conversation? Saying, look, I've looked at your business. I can understand what your problems are, and I think I can help you with some of those problems. And that's it. I'm just trying to solve your problems. So it's quite basic. Sometimes when I see people launching incredibly complicated marketing campaigns, just the first thing is work out how many people have you got to speak to, and what's the most efficient way of speaking to them. And when you think of it like that, it all becomes quite simple.
If we assume we're talking to entrepreneurs who are a couple of years into the game, and they are looking at their marketing strategy at the moment. I heard on another show that you broke down how you thought about Moonpig's marketing, which was an incredible success story, specifically on TV, where you spent something like 300 grand a year on TV advertising at one point, then realized that it was the most profitable marketing channel, which then over the course of 18 months or 8 months, I think, in 8 months, you went then from 300 grand a year to 1.2 million a month.
What actually happened there was that the first thing you have to work out is what's the bare minimum that you need to spend per channel to get an answer. And TV is quite a chunky thing. You've got to put together an advert. You've got to buy a minimum of sort of 50,000, probably these days now, £100,000 worth of media to get an answer. So with my approach to different channels is the whole lot of different channels you can test. Work out what's the bare minimum you need to spend to work out what the cost of customer acquisition is per channel, and then pick off the low-hanging fruit. And what you'll find is if you overspend on a particular channel, you get to a certain point and that cost of customer acquisition will start to rise. And then you maybe pick the next lowest hanging fruit and spend there. So what we did with TV was that we spent 50,000, I think £80,000, £30,000 making the advert and £50,000 of media. And from that, we got the answer that it cost us about £9 to recruit a customer. So £9 worked for us. So I knew before that how much I could afford to spend per customer and get a reasonable payback from the gross margin. So having worked that out, that was my target. We'd hit the target. So then the next thing is, okay, well, we know that works. If it works for 50,000, does it work for 100,000? So we went 50, 100, 200, 400, 800, 1.2 million. And at 1.2 million, this is per month. At 1.8 to 2 million, we got some resistance, and the cost of customer acquisition started to rise. So we pulled it back down to about £800,000 a month, and we stayed there. I think pretty much for about 5 years, we spending £10 million on TV. But the same, I mean, it's slightly more complicated now. You've got a lot more channels, more social media channels. But with all of these channels, you want to have a target cost of what's the target cost of acquisition, and then just keep testing it, but always measuring it. And the measurement is very important, which is one of the reasons why I've often said it's much better to teach a mathematician how to be a marketeer than teach a marketeer how to be a mathematician. A lot of marketeers don't, if they're not mathematically minded, when it comes to the analysis, they'll trip up. So, and especially with with consumer customer acquisition models, it is very mathematical. But before all of that, the most important thing about marketing, and perhaps the most important lesson I learned, is get the product right in the first place. If you're trying to flog something that people don't want, all the analysis in the world is not going to help you. The most important thing is am I producing something that my customers want? Focus on that. You focus on that. Get that bit right. Once you've got that bit right, you then say, right, okay, and then you've got some customers. Then work out that you've got the right product, and also work out that you've got the right price, which is also quite important. I mean, price is one area that so many companies cock up on, but just not charging enough, not charging or charging too much. But generally speaking, not charging enough. So once you've got that bit right, then it's a question of how do you put more customers in there, and then and then after that, how do you look after the customers and keep them? Because keeping customers is a hell of a lot cheaper than getting new customers. And if there's one thing that I look for in any business that I invest in these days, it's repeat business. Repeat business is everything. Anyone can persuade someone to buy something once. Getting them to come back and voluntarily choose to buy it again is an indication that something's working.
We'll go back to price in a second, but I remember you said how you look at customer value over 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months as opposed to lifetime value.
Well, yeah. I mean, what's a lifetime? It's a slightly meaningless term, because what you're really concerned about is how quickly you're going to get your money back. So if someone says to me, our lifetime value of a customer is £1,000, that doesn't tell me how quickly my investment is going to come back in the form of gross margin. If you say 3-month value, 6-month value, 8-month value, 9-month value, whatever, I know how much gross margin you're bringing in over those months. Now, that's more predictable. But say, for example, if you're a mattress company, and there have been several of those that have started up, and they say, well, our lifetime value is this much, but that's dependent on someone buying another mattress in 7 years' time. Well, that doesn't help my cash flow much, does it? I know lifetime value gets used a lot, but it's a pretty meaningless term, because at some point you've either got to decide a discount that you apply, a discount percentage that you apply to the forward years. It's a bit meaningless. So it's much better to think in terms of how much am I going to get back on my first order? I mean, a very conservative approach would be if my average order value is £90 and I'm making 50% gross margin, I'm making 45% gross profit on my first order. If I'm not spending any more than £45 to acquire that customer, then at least I know I'm not losing money on this. And the next order, the repeat business, that's all jam. That's a nice, safe, conservative approach. Now, with Moonpig, we had to be a bit more aggressive than that, because we were going to spend more to acquire a customer than we were going to make in the first order. On the other hand, we'd analysed exactly what customers do, and we modelled it. We knew how quickly they would come back, and we knew that we would get our money back within 3 months on gross margin from their next order and so on. So that's one of the reasons I suggest maths is so important in this, is in really understanding your data, understanding what your customers are doing, and being able to model that.
Another thing I heard you speak about was that the only textbook you went back to from your MBA was your statistics textbook, which you spoke about how you need to figure out how many customers you need to hit for statistical significance to figure out what the customer acquisition cost was. Can you just go into what statistical significance means?
Well, yeah. So it's basically how little money do I need to spend to be able to get a statistically significant answer about what that channel cost me. So, for example, if I spend, if I go onto Google Ads and I spend £10, and I happen to get lucky and get a customer very quickly, my result tomorrow might be completely different. I might get nobody. So it has to be statistically significant. Simply means it's got to be. You're fairly confident that number is accurate. In other words, if you repeat it once, if you repeat it again next week, you're going to get a similar answer. So, and generally speaking, per channel, we were finding, for example, that with social media, with Facebook, we could experiment with £2,000 and get an answer. So why spend £100,000? And I often get approaches from people say, I want to raise £1 million for a marketing campaign, and I want to spend £100,000 on Facebook. And I said, well, we'll just spend £2,000 and find out what the answer is. Do you know how much it costs you to recruit through? No, I don't know. Well, come back when you've spent £2,000 to find out the answer, and I might be a little bit more confident about giving you money. But it's amazing how many people come forward with business plans that involve spending lots of money on marketing before they even know what a customer is worth to them and what it's going to cost them to acquire a customer through a particular channel. And all of that could be achieved for a hell of a lot less money.
And then when you figure out how much you're willing to spend to get back that investment in terms of gross margin, you're looking at customers coming back 3, 6, 12 months' time, depending on your product.
Yeah, I mean, on day one of a business plan, you start off with a hypothesis. So I think customers will come back every 2 months. But after 2 months, you've got an answer, haven't you? Because you've already recruited some customers and you've worked out, and you know historically what they're doing. So what I like to see is a model that says, here is my hypothesis of how much it's going to cost us. And this is based on, I've got X months worth of actual data. And over time, every month that goes by, you have some real historical data to back up your hypothesis, and it becomes more and more accurate as a model. But at one point, our Moonpig model was able to predict, based on what we would plan to spend, was it told us how much we ought to be able to spend, and therefore how much our revenue ought to be in a year's time. And it was pretty accurate, plus or minus 5%. Because there was a speed at which we could spend money on acquiring customers. And if we tried to throw more money at it, what we found was the cost of customer acquisition would rise.
And so it all hinged on the customer coming back enough times within the 3-month period that you then had your return on investment in what it cost to acquire them in the first place. How did you get them to come back?
Get the product right. I mean, there's some products like a mattress, for example, where you're not going to come back every 3 months. And there are other products like a Moonpig card where, yes, you are. So it's all dependent on what it is that you're selling. And it's a lot easier, a hell of a lot easier in a business where people are likely to spend a little often. Because it becomes much more predictable. You've got lots and lots of customers spending a small amount, but very regularly, and that becomes very predictable. Much less predictable if you're selling a mattress, and you're not going to have an answer about repeat business until they've replaced it in 7 years' time, and that takes quite a long time to acquire. So it depends on the kind of business you've got.
The other thing that was crucial about Moonpig is that you had this viral effect because the product was great, because the cards were funny. People would look at a Moonpig card and they would buy. How would you figure out what that viral effect was?
Well, of course, the most important thing is that I buy a card and I send it to you. If I was buying it for myself, there's no virality in that. I buy it, I like it, I'm happy with my purchase. On the other hand, if I buy something, send it to you, and you think it's hilarious, and you look on the back and it says moonpig.com, you will go and buy one. So we could work out the referral rate. We would measure the referral rate of, for every 10 cards that we sent out, we would recruit 3 customers. And that's the thing about gifting is an inherently viral thing because people are sending it to other people. Much social networks are inherently viral because they're adding people to it. Other things are not.
And you would measure this viral effect because when someone was a new customer on Moonpig, you'd say, "How did you hear about us?" And there would be a
very basic form of working out what's going on is if you have we had a simple survey afterwards, which we didn't make mandatory. What we found is if you make a customer survey mandatory, people just need to if they need to get through it to get to the next stage, they'll just tick anything. On the other hand, if you ask them, would you like to do the survey, and they choose to, they'll give you an accurate answer. And if you've got 15% of people who buy answer that question in an honest manner and take the time to do it properly, you get a much more accurate answer than 100% of people just whipping through it in order to get through to the checkout. So because you can extrapolate from that. If you've got, we would have, I think about 30% of people would answer that survey, how they heard about us. And we chuck in the odd test question, like, did you hear us on the radio? Well, we were never on the radio. So if 50% of people were saying they heard us on the radio, there's something wrong. So little things like that. I mean, it's quite basic. But then from that, you can extrapolate, right, okay, I received a card. So one of those questions would be, I received a card from a friend. And when it gets to about 30, 40% of people saying that, you think, okay, that's significant.
So if we then zoom out and we look at this marketing strategy on the whole, boiling it down to simple truths, how much can we acquire different our customers across these different platforms?
Starting point of any marketing strategy is, have I got the right product? It's product is the most important thing. So am I selling something that people want? Are people excited about buying it? And do they want to come back? That's really important. So it's getting the product right and pitching it at the right level, price-wise. You want to be pitching at a level where it's as expensive as people are prepared to pay. If you haven't got somebody telling you it's too expensive, it's probably too cheap. So, and at the same time, if no one's telling you it's too expensive, you probably are too cheap. So,
how did you do that price?
Well, I
testing?
learned a lesson very early on because for some reason when I first started Moonpig, I started at £1.99 a card because that was about the average price per card in a shop. And I thought, if I can produce a card for the same price as a shop, but it's better because you can personalize it, that would be a winner. And the problem was there wasn't that much margin in it. And we were probably about to go bust. And one of my non-exec directors said, why don't we just put the price up to £2.99? And it was still very early days and nobody really knew about Moonpig and there were no other competitors around really. So we put it up to £2.99 and nothing happened volume-wise. So we measured the volume, nothing happened. I think we got an email from someone who said, I'm very annoyed that you put the price up. I will still carry on buying, but I'm very annoyed. And that was it. That was the only resistance that we got. So that the units were exactly the same as before, but the gross margin went up. We increased our gross margin, but we doubled it overnight. And that's, had we not done that, we wouldn't have survived. What was interesting is that there was a company in Holland that decided that €1.99 was the right price. It's called Greets, which subsequently got bought by Moonpig. But then they kept their price at €1.99 for so long that other competitors came into the market and also started setting, because they'd set the price at €1.99. And they couldn't back out of it at that point. They couldn't suddenly break away and start charging €2.99. But as a result, they had a very successful, selling lots of cards, but they weren't making any money. So getting the price right in the first place is quite important, because it's a lot easier it's a lot easier to come down than just to go up.
If you were to approach that problem again as to figuring out the price, I'm assuming you probably wouldn't rely on your Ned's David Noble to say, oh, maybe we should just try it at $2.99 as opposed to $1.99. How would you test what price it should be now?
Well, I'd probably start a bit higher and start a bit higher and come down. At the beginning, you just got to test it out and find out where the resistance is.
And there's a balancing act between number of customers at one price and then number of customers at a lower price, and the balancing act is which one gives the overall most amount of revenue.
You don't want it to become, we wanted Moonpig to become a place where people buy all their cards, not just a few very, very special cards. Actually, not all their cards, because we never want to get into sort of the bulk Christmas purchase, because that's not a market we would ever compete in, because our printing process is so much more expensive. But we wanted to be taking up everybody's premium card buying spend.
And you would just test that on whether people came to you for their premium card buying spend by adjusting the price and testing it, or
well, no. If I was starting a new business from scratch, I would think, okay, well, let's set it at this level, and if we get a bit of resistance, then we'll just we'll inch it down. We'll start with discounts, or we'll just reprice. But it's easier to come down than go up.
Price is one thing. Product is the thing. It's like it starts and ends with your product.
Yeah, and people have just got to love the product. People, we always got terribly excited about people receiving Moonpig cards. And what I loved doing was going down to the production line and seeing cards come off. And I could see the card and I think, God, they're going to love that. They're going to love that card. That's a brilliant card. And that's what it's all about. You've got to be excited about someone receiving it at the other end. The most important element of it. I mean, I still love the product, and I still love seeing them on people's mantelpieces. Every time I look at people's mantelpiece, I work out, I would look at the back of the card, see if it's a Moonpig card. So getting that bit right, putting that thought in at the beginning is really, really important. And never stopping. You never stop analysing that and working out, is it getting a bit tired now? Do we need to refresh it? Do we need to keep it going? Can we introduce anything new? Is there any novelty, anything new we can add to the mix? And that matters a lot for something like greeting cards. It matters a lot less for dog food, where my dog will eat the same dog food every day for the rest of her life. I'm perfectly happy. Great business to be in. So there's no need for innovation there. You just get the product right and stay there. Whereas with gifting and cards, you've got to constantly innovate.
If we're assuming you were starting a new business today, how would you go about testing whether your product is 50% right, 80% right, 100% right?
Just get it out there. If you've got the luxury of being able to do that, get it out there and see. I know, because you're generally starting off from point. I didn't start off from scratch with Moonpig. I knew people bought greeting cards. And I knew also that a lot of the designs that we were using we'd taken from publishers, and they've been tried and tested in the shops. We were just making them a bit better. That's all. So we had a lot of information about how much people were prepared to pay for a card. One, do they like cards? Yes, we know that. How much are they prepared to pay for an unpersonalized card? We know that. Which designs are most popular? We know that. So there's a lot of information that we already had. We weren't sort of flailing around in the dark there.
Makes sense. Product, price, what are the other aspects of this marketing strategy that are important?
Love your customer, look after them. When a customer calls and says and wants to know, the most important thing is they want an answer. So if they've got a question, it might be, where is my card? They don't actually care whether a computer answers that or a person answers that. They want to know the answer. And I would much rather, if it suddenly occurs to me, if I've got a question at 2:00 in the morning, I don't care if a computer says your order is here, or it's a human being. I don't need a lovely human being to tell me that, but I do want an answer, and I want it quickly. I don't want to wait. I feel quite passionately about customer service, and we've got a whole load of innovation and technology now that could help with customer service. But actually, sometimes a lot of companies get it wrong. So what technology enables us to do is to offer 24-hour-a-day service and answer you. It enables you to answer very, very quickly, and should answer you very accurately as well. But then with the X% of inquiries that can't be answered very quickly, those things need to be picked up and sort of filtered to somebody who can actually answer them. I don't want to be sent around the houses on some sort of a press button menu, particularly when someone is trying to say, we're experiencing a heavy volume of calls. Your call is important to us. No, it's not. If you're experiencing a heavy burden of calls, employ more people or find another way of doing it. But don't keep me waiting for 45 minutes on listening to Muzak. Or very often they will have some sort of cute computer answer that just doesn't have the answer to my thing, so it just keeps going around in a circle. So AI is phenomenal, and a lot of these bots are phenomenal if you use it as a way of filtering out the easy answers, so that your customer service team can brilliantly deal with the problems that aren't dealt with by that. But a lot of companies get that bit wrong. So looking after your customers is important, making them feel important. First thing is answer the phone quickly. And that involves working out what's your typical volume of call and what system do I have to be able to answer the call within 3 seconds. It's quite basic. So many companies get it wrong.
Am I right in thinking that you employed actors?
In the early days, because Moonpig was around long before a lot of AI existed, and you've got to have people who are who are personable. On the other end of the phone, partly because it's quite a pleasant surprise when you pick up the phone and the other person, the person at the other end, is intelligent and genuinely interested in solving your problem. So we tried a variety of different sources of people, but actually the Stage magazine was fantastic because we got a lot of resting actors, and some of them were resting for quite a long time. I think 95% of actors are resting at any given time, but they would get into the role, and they were very eloquent, well-spoken, and empathetic. Brilliant. And we had this deal where we said, look, if you work for us, if you get a gig, get an audition, you can take any time you like off for auditions. And if you're in the theatre, take your time off, do your run. We'll all come and see you. And then you can come back afterwards. Brilliant. But what we did get was people with real empathy. And that matters, when we were very lucky in a sense with Moonpig, because a Moonpig card doesn't cost very much to send another one. So the first thing is, if someone's missing a card, like, just send them another one. If they say my card didn't arrive, maybe it did, maybe it didn't, send them another one. So we were able to do that. It's more difficult if you're selling expensive handbags or something. But we enjoyed solving the problems. And I think the challenge very often on the customer service desk is how can you get a customer who's a bit miffed and make them happy, get them to send a thank you. Brilliant. That's joy. As opposed to so many customer service teams who just think, how do I get out of this without spending any money? The other really important element of this, of course, is work out why, if there was a problem, why did that problem happen and how do we stop that problem happening again? So if a card got delayed, why did it get delayed? And let's work out that glitch and stop that happening again. So that analysis is very important.
And then once you've got a customer, it's much cheaper to keep them. And that's when, if you can increase their value over 3, 6, 12 months and beyond, it's much cheaper than if you're having to spend to acquire a new customer. One of the things that you did, I don't know when you introduced this, but you set up reminders for people as to when so-and-so's birthday was, and would you like Moonpig to send you an email reminder for their birthday next year, which I thought was genius.
Yeah, very helpful.
How much of your revenue did things like that end up?
I think quite a lot of it became from reminders, because particularly if you set up with the right advanced notice period, then it's you're not going to, people don't clog up their diaries with those sort of things, but when they get an email reminder from Moonpig, right, my godson's birthday, brilliant, bing, off we go. Works every time. It works because it's helpful. It's genuinely very helpful, and nobody minds getting an email saying it's your godson's birthday, because thanks very much, that was very helpful. As opposed to just another offer. You can, emails, it's very difficult to work out how many emails you can send before people just tune out. And with the volume of traffic I get, a lot of it is unsubscribe, unsubscribe, unsubscribe. So it's got to be useful.
Comes back to knowing your customers and what's valuable to them.
And, they've then invested the time and effort in putting in addresses and putting in birthdays into their account, which makes it sticky. As long as we're offering the best greeting card, why would you go anywhere else?
Going on to now, we sort of touched on it, but the team. So you built a team in Russia, and then we're speaking about how important customer service is and how you took care of those people in the team now, or back then, sorry. Something else that you mentioned before is when there's an external threat of annihilation, that's when everyone comes together. Can you speak to one of those moments when Moonpig was under the hammer and people rallied?
We had 5 years of a bit of a roller coaster. Sales were always going up. It's just that our losses were decreasing. It's just that we had to find more money to put in. So there was always an existential threat of not being able to raise the next bit of money that would keep us alive until we finally break even. So we had the advantage, psychologically, we had the advantage of our sales were increasing by 30, 40% a year. So yes, it was our best day ever, our best Tuesday ever, our best Wednesday ever. So that was going on in the background. At the same time, the team also knew that we were fighting hard to try to put enough money in to feed the losses until we broke even. And that was, we were gradually getting there, but it took a bit of a leap of faith. And so we were fighting a battle that we believed we could ultimately win. I think it would have been more depressing had sales been sliding downwards. That's just a bit depressing. But we had sales going up and saying, can we persuade enough people this is worth investing in to cover our losses until we finally break through the clouds into the sunshine. And the other great thing is that when you're running that team, and they knew the sacrifice I was making, I was mortgaging myself to the hilt and throwing everything I'd got into it. They were still getting paid, so it's quite easy to sort of manage to rally the team behind in this great sort of Stakhanovite effort. Funny enough, it's harder when everything's on a level playing field and we're you're making lots of money and it can get a little bit fat and flabby and people relax a bit more. But we had to fight for it, and the people enjoyed the fight. They enjoyed the scrappy startup thing. And they get into the spirit of that. I think it is in some respects harder to find motivation in a very company that's been successful for quite a long time. As long as they're getting paid. I think the moment you stop paying people, their interest disappears pretty quickly after that.
Yeah, what is it? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They have to be able to put a roof over their head.
I mean, exactly. I mean, it's because they're fighting the fight, but actually, ultimately, as long as they're getting paid, they're not suffering. But they are taking the risk that there is a risk element to that, which is that lots of startups just crash and burn. I think the worst thing is when people crash, and the directors of a business know when things are going to crash and burn, and that what's really important is to pick that moment when you've still got the money to be able to pay people their notice period. I think it's completely unforgivable for companies to crash and burn and not be able to pay people for work they have already done, let alone their notice period. That's appalling behavior.
Going back to the analogy of breaking through the clouds into the sunshine, what were the clouds, metaphorically speaking, in Moonpig's case?
Well, making a profit. I mean, we had 1 month where we suddenly made a profit, and that was it. We were through the clouds because until then we'd always had this thing of, yes, we were growing, but we still had to feed the losses until the declining losses, but we still had to feed them until we got through to the other side. Once you made a profit, you think, well, we're going to survive. That's it. We're through. And I had spent 5 years trying to scramble together enough money to keep the thing going, and never quite knew that it was going to reach that point until it did.
And I'm assuming it was just a case of economies of scale, such that enough cards are ordered that the cost per card goes down.
The thing is that the cost per card was pretty much the same. The margin per card, it's just that we needed more cards. We need to sell more cards. And above a certain level, our overheads will remain the same. Our overheads were fairly fixed. And we need to sell a certain number of cards to break even. Simple as that. And anything beyond that was jam. And very rapidly, the gross margins are pretty healthy. So anything, once we got beyond that point, we rapidly started making money. But we had to get there. I think one of the things when I look back, I appreciate that we were trying to economize everywhere we could. And I think for about 2 years, we didn't really spend any money on marketing at all. Didn't spend any money on customer acquisition. We just looked after our customers and allowed our customers to sell our product. And we grew in the 2 years, 2003, 2004, we grew growing about 30, 40% a year. Didn't spend any money on customer acquisition. That was all viral.
Wow.
When I look at a business now, and you look at so many businesses where if you turn the marketing off, it just drops off a cliff. And so that to me is the sign of a really strong, healthy business, is when sales are maintained, when you don't spend any money on customer acquisition.
Rewinding a little bit back to this point of it's quite easy to motivate people when it's the startup mentality and you're trying to break through the clouds.
Yeah.
Assuming you went back into Moonpig today, it's now a healthy business, it's matured. How would you instill that sense of passion and urgency into the team in that sort of business?
I think it's more about maintaining it. I think they've got a great sense of they've done a very, very, very good job since I sold the business of keeping that going and growing it. I mean, they've grown it much further than I imagined it was possible. And a lot of it is about just focus on the reaction of the person who gets a card. And I go back to the earlier point of, you go onto the production line, you look at a card, and you think, and you have to see them live. You see a real live card, and you think, yeah, they're going to love this card. The person who gets this is going to love this card, because it's not theoretical. This is very real. That's a real person, and that's a real photograph they've added, and the caption is real, and the comment is hilarious, and never let go of that. That's what we're all about. It's about the joy of someone getting that card. As long as you're focused on that, everything else sort of falls into place after that.
If you focus on the team, though, Moonpig now has over 700 employees.
750, yeah.
What were the different points of employee count growth?
So by the time I sold, it had 100. So it's grown massively, and that's a very different. And to be honest, I'm not involved at all. I don't have any ownership in it anymore. So it's a different kind of thing. You're managing a very stable business, a lot of employees, and more levels of management. That's a different beast altogether. I went through the stage of knowing every single person. At one point, every single person who came in through the door, I'd hired and interviewed. And then by the time I sold it, I would walk into the office and occasionally see someone and think, who's that? No idea. So so that's when you get to that point where you realize that that you don't recognize them, and then there comes a point where they don't recognize you. I do remember going to visit Moonpig once, and I turned up at reception, and they said, the guy at the reception said, "What's your name, please?" I said, "Nick Jenkins." "What's your company?" "What's up?" I used to be at Moonpig, but I had no. I mean, no idea. I mean, why should she? I mean, why? It's irrelevant to most people who work there, and most of my customers. That's who I am. It's irrelevant. It's all about the product. But then you think, it's moved on.
It's a piece of humble pie.
Yeah.
Most companies don't get past the 100-person mark.
Yeah.
And so if we think about that 0 to 100, how did you manage that scaling team from 0 to 100? What were the different challenges along the way?
The painful point is introducing another level of management. So I remember there was a painful point where the people who were doing the marketing answered to me, and then we needed a marketing director. Then they answered to her, and then we had several teams. So we then had one person responsible for customer service, one person responsible for. So it's basically getting customers and looking after customers. That's how we divided up. Then we introduced another level of management. It's amazing, the productivity sort of fell because when you introduce another level, there is a diseconomy of scale in that you introduce a level of reporting and decisions take longer. Things just take longer. People often think that larger companies have efficiencies of scale. They have some, but they're also diseconomies of scale. And this slow process of decisions being taken and decisions being taken up here and finding the way down to the bottom, and word from the bottom finding its way back up to the top. That's friction. So that was a fairly difficult point when get a certain size. You think you can only have about 10 people reporting into you at any one point, maximum 10 people. So that obviously affects this pyramid, and it affects how you can grow. And it's a little bit painful. I think with software development, for example, when we started, we got to about 2003, 2004. The website, looks a bit different now stylistically, but by and large does exactly what it does now. We had one person who wrote that software, Jay Jetley, brilliant guy. He wrote this. He wrote the software. Not only that, poor guy had to deal with someone calling from the other side saying, "Oi, Jay, I'm doing an Excel spreadsheet. How do you do this for?" I mean, in the middle of him programming, he's sitting in the middle of the office trying to program our next bit of code, and someone's asking him if there's some technical software to do with Excel, and he managed all of that. And then, but of course, at the same time, probably wasn't writing most of it down. It wasn't that we would say, "Jay, sit down and say, we've got this new feature. How long do you reckon it would take you to do that?" "I don't know, about 3 days." "Yeah. What if we did that? If we increased our sales by 1%, then that would be yeah, just do it, and it would just get done." And as you get bigger, you can't do that. You can't do things in the same way. So you have to have procedures for. All sorts of protocols for changing software and so on, but just in case someone leaves or falls down and you're suddenly left very vulnerable. So you have to have it, but my God, it slows it down. And large companies have enormous software teams that by and large do the same as they might have been doing with a tenth of the number of people, but it's much more reliable. That's quite hard to gauge, to get right.
So you have reliability at the expense of speed.
Yeah, so I mean, we could fix all of our problems, but if Jay had fallen under a bus, we would have been in a real pickle. And you can't do that as a large company. There also comes a point where you've got to work out, okay, when you're turning over $1 million, a 1% increase in sales is not going to justify an enormous amount of software expenditure. If you're turning over 100 million, a 1% increase is £1 million. So if you can make 1% incremental changes on a 100 million turnover, you can afford to throw more resource at it. And in fact, it would be a false economy not to do that. It's interesting. You spend the first 5 years trying to save as much money as possible, and then you get to a point where you think, I'm making money now. Now I have to start to invest in growth. And it's psychologically quite hard because you spent the last 4 or 5 years trying to save every penny you possibly can. And now you're throwing money at growth. And it takes a while to get your head around that.
At what point did you notice that change in your mindset?
Well, once we started making a profit, we then thought, okay, well now we can afford to grow, and so we'll have to spend a bit of money on things that might work, might not work. Well, like TV, we threw a bit of money at that. We made £80,000 profit in 2005, and we spent all that £80,000 on our first TV ad. Thankfully, it worked. But I took the view that up until that point, I couldn't have afforded to lose £80,000 because that would have finished us off. But at that point, I thought, okay, we're going to survive. So if I put £80,000 into this TV ad and it doesn't work, at least I know it doesn't work. I think people often discount the value of knowing the answer. So it's not wasted money. If you spend £80,000 on a particular TV campaign, and it tells you that TV doesn't work for you, that's £80,000 worth of information. It's incredibly useful, because when you're planning ahead and you're planning the future, well, I know the answer to that. We've tried that, and I know the answer. If you don't know the answer, if you've never tried it, you don't know.
Very true.
And you could think, okay, well, we'll break into America. So when we broke into America, we set up an American operation with a printing operation in New York. And you would assume, logically, you might think America's 5 times bigger. It costs us £10 to get a customer here. If we spend this much money in America, we'll get, the market is that much bigger. Oh, ergo, we will be huge in America. And then you try it for the first time and think, oh God, it cost us 60 quid. Exactly the same style of advertising, exactly the same channel, cost us 60 quid, not 10 quid. But that's incredibly useful information.
Interesting, because there's obviously the cultural differences, but people tend to think that the UK and US cultures are relatively similar, as opposed to if you try to break into Asia, for example.
Yeah, you think that, and we employed a bunch of Americans to develop the American. We wanted the American site not to look British. We didn't want anyone to look at it and think, oh great, quirky British humour. We wanted them to look at that and think, that's a great card site, and not notice that it wasn't that it wasn't necessarily US born. But even with that, I mean, there are differences. The postal service is slower over there, so the idea of spontaneously buying a card to deliver to someone is less appealing if it's going to take 5 days. There's more of a culture of sending e-cards. Their sense of humor is different. We British people love to mock. We love to mock our friends. You'll send them really quite a rude card with their name woven into a funny joke that mocks them. They stick it in their fridge. Oh, it's brilliant. They love that. Less so in America, clearly.
Going back to the last point on the team, you're growing, you have to incorporate these different levels of management. How did you think about delegation? How did you think about passing things off to different people? Eventually you delegate yourself out of the business such that you turn up at reception and they're like, who are you?
What is important is letting go. I think if you know that someone is going to correct your homework before you hand it in, you don't care as much. So if you know that someone's going to say, oh, no, don't do that, do it like this, you won't take responsibility for it. When Ian took over as from commercial director to being managing director, and then I finally handed over, I said, look, I took 3 months off. I said, I'm going on holiday for 3 months. I'm going traveling. I'm not contactable. And if you screw up, it's your fault. There's nothing quite like that. To make someone realize, oh, no. Wow, oh my God, the buck actually does stop here. And they step up. And people do step up when you give them responsibility. I mean, you've got to make sure they're capable of that. They're capable of taking it on. But it's very empowering to know that, no, you are responsible now. And I'm not going to bite your head off if it goes wrong, but it's your responsibility.
And you knew Ian was capable because you hired him before and he was working with you.
I hired him as a commercial director and worked with him for 2 years and handed over department by department. And then eventually he took the whole thing over. So I then focused really much more, became chairman and focused much more on the sale of the business for a couple of years until we sold it.
What are the skills required to sell the business?
Well, I don't know that it necessarily took any skill. You first of all build a business that's worth buying, and that's the most important thing. And after that, it's if you've got a business that's worth buying, that solves itself. That's the most important thing. Selling a business that nobody wants to buy is really, really tough. But we had a fantastic business. It was throwing off cash. It was growing like we were, I think, the number 2 in the profit track. So we grew at a compound rate of 146% profit. I mean, that's an average over 3 years. It was spectacular. When I look at it now, I mean, at the time I thought, oh, that's nice. Now I look at it and think that's unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. And there's no other business that I look at that perform like that. And all of that profit was cash. It was just spitting out cash because our depreciation was very little. We got paid. Cash flow was cash flow positive because we got paid by our customers and we paid our suppliers after 60 days. It was a phenomenal business model. So actually, selling it was pretty straightforward. I didn't have to do very much. Just had to coordinate the process, really.
Up until that point, you'd made so much profit that you'd paid yourself out heavily in dividends, which is quite different to how businesses are run nowadays. Can you speak to our conversation before we started recording?
It was quite simple. I would look at it and think, can I usefully spend money on advertising? And we looked at every channel of marketing, customer acquisition, and worked out how much we could spend before we started to increase the cost of customer acquisition. And we were throwing 10 million a year at TV advertising. But if we spent 15, we would nudge from profitability. It just wouldn't be particularly cost effective. So we got to a point where we were reinvesting as much as we could, as much as the channels could absorb. After that, what do you do with the cash? I mean, we could have tried to use some of it to buy other businesses maybe, but no, I pay out as dividends. At that point, we didn't have any institutional investors. We only had private investors, who were all delighted to receive a dividend.
And
it's a very old-fashioned concept, that, isn't it? Actually, we're making a profit. How retro.
And by the time that you sold, you pay yourself out something like 12 million in dividends? Is that right?
I think that's what I'd taken out of it. Yeah.
But now, you were speaking before about how the tax structure in the UK is not incentivizing people to build businesses in that way.
No, the tax structure, for certainly for all of the time that I had Moonpig, the tax structure incentivized the selling of businesses. Because you pay 20% capital gains tax on the sale of a business, whereas if you make a profit, you first of all pay corporation tax on that, and then what's left out, that's 23%. Take that off. You then pay dividend tax on the remainder. So you're paying sort of, let's say, for argument's sake, close to 50%. So in order to, if you've got that question, well, should I run it for profit or sell it? Actually, it's more advantageous to sell it. So there's a lot of debate now about leveling out income tax and capital gains tax, and there is some sense in that, because as long as it's indexed.
What does that mean?
Well, as long as it's, for example, if you buy a house for £1 million 50 years ago, well, it would have been that, but let's say 20 years ago, and 20 years later you sell it, and all it's done is increased by the rate of inflation, you shouldn't get taxed on inflation. So indexation was something that was introduced. I mean, we've had this in the past, long before the days of proper computing, where you would have a rate of inflation that you would take off your gain each year, so that you were only paying tax on the increase above inflation. Because capital gains tend to happen over a period of time, income happens within a year. So within that year, there is no significant inflation, so that's fine. But you do create these scenarios where it's more of an incentive to sell a business than run it for profit. The other major factor, of course, is that if you've ever taken any money from a venture capitalist, of course you're going to have to sell it, because they have a 10-year fund and they need their money back. Simple as that. So very few people think about setting up a business and running it for profit. And there are very few examples of it, but the White Company and Charles Stirrup Shirt, two examples of companies 100% owned by their founders. No outside investment, just run it for profit for years and years and years. Lots of family businesses do the same. And you grow slowly, you grow organically, and you don't sell shares to other people. And lo and behold, you're then free to run it as you like and keep it forever, ever and ever. It seems like an old-fashioned concept, but it makes perfect sense.
But if you had it in your mind that you were going to sell the business at some point, the tax on you taking dividends was around 50%, and the capital gains tax, if you'd sold it, was around 20%.
Yeah.
Would you not have reinvested that profit into, let's say, opening in new markets?
Well, I mean, there's what there is. If you're going to run it forever, there is no point in continually running it so you don't take a profit out of it. And at some point in your lifetime, you want to. I mean, you can always take the view that I'm making the company bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But at some point you've got your own life to live. You want to buy a nice house and go on a nice holiday. So you can't do that. You can't keep growing it without a profit forever and ever and ever. I mean, that's not quite true. There are companies, particularly VC-backed companies, have this sort of the rule of 40, which is that you want your if you measure the percentage growth in sales and then you add the EBITDA profitability, then that ideally that should be above 40. So in other words, you can afford to be throwing a lot of money at a business and losing 20% a year if you're growing by 60%, because that 60% minus 20 is 40. If on the other hand, you're growing by 10% and you're losing 50% of your revenue, then you're stuffed. So there's a sensible ratio. And as a VC company, it makes no sense to be taking out profits and dividends. What you want to do is grow, sell. And so you want to take, if you can meaningfully spend any surplus gross margin on growing the business, you would do that. The problem I had at Moonpig is that we hadn't got anything we could throw money at. We'd thrown money at TV as much as we could. There were no other big channels to throw money at. So short of buying another business, which I didn't particularly want to do because there was nobody else to buy. We're the biggest in the market. There's nobody else to buy. What are you going to do with the money?
What about vertical integration? What about buying your manufacturers?
We already were. We were completely vertically integrated. We had our own factory. We took in basic paper and spat out the final product. We'd done that. We did that from the beginning.
That's why it was easy to sell your business, because it was a good business.
Yeah.
Ian asked another question, which was around the team and more specifically recruiting people. What did you look for when you were recruiting people?
What I looked for was a good fit. It's not about necessarily employing the best qualified person. It's about someone who looks at that job and thinks that job is good for me, and I will stick with it for 3. And they can see a 3, 4, 5 year horizon, and you can see a 3, 4 year horizon, because that's something you can find someone who is amazing, absolutely brilliantly qualified, but your company is not their ideal choice. Now you might get them because you catch them at a weak moment, but they're always going to be looking somewhere else. So what you want to find is a really good match. I mean, a great example of that is the ski club that I've just opened, an indoor ski club. What I wanted was a ski instructor. And the problem with ski instructors, most ski instructors want to be on the slope teaching and on snow. And we're an indoor slope in Wiltshire. But I need someone to be there 12 months of the year, including the skiing season. And so what I was looking for was not necessarily the best qualified ski instructor. I was looking for someone who wanted to be in England and teaching skiing. And as it happened, I got someone whose girlfriend is a midwife. She's based locally, so he wanted to be in the country 12 months a year, but he loves skiing and he loves teaching. And he's fairly well qualified, but not the best qualified person that applied. But actually, he's the best fit because it's a perfect job for him. And I know that it's worked out very well. So it's about fit, and how they've got to be excited about their prospects for the next 3 or 4 years. And equally, you've got to offer them the room to grow. So you can say, right, okay, this is where you're going to start, and this is what I think you could be doing in 3 or 4 years' time. You don't have to look much further than 4 or 5 years' time. But you've got to be able to offer them some sort of growth. And then expect that they will move on.
Once they're hired, once they're in the team, what's the components of a healthy culture? Maybe it's less applicable with the skiing company because it's only you and this guy. But in Moonpig,
I think first of all, they've got to feel comfortable in their workplace. They've got to feel valued. They've got to feel as though I think most importantly, as human beings, we fundamentally like to feel useful. It's a real deep human need to feel useful. And you do that by thinking, right, I did a good job today. I've improved this, I've done this, I've added that. If someone isn't doing that, if they're not useful, then they probably need to move on. And regardless of, I never worry about having to put food on their table. What I worry about is can you add something to this? If not, then you need to go somewhere where you can. So never underestimate that importance of us as human beings needing to feel useful. So that's and to do that, you need to be empowered. You need to be able to have the freedom to take decisions and experiment and try things. And you need to feel as though you're growing and that you've got things to learn. So when you've catered for that, I think salary should always be neutral. The money side should always be neutral. If you overpay people, it makes it very difficult to get rid of them if they're not very good, because no one else is going to pay them what you're paying them. And I learned this lesson relatively early on when I was overpaying a print manager, I think, and I tried to encourage him that maybe he should look further afield. But no one was going to pay him what I was paying him.
And you wouldn't just fire him because you had to pay a severance package.
Well, I'd rather that people reach their own conclusion with that. I mean, in the end, I had to, but because also the other thing is that I don't have any problem with letting people go if I have treated them fairly and they have been able to move on and find somewhere where they're more useful, because ultimately they're going to be better off where they're more useful. They're not useful in my company. They need to be useful somewhere else. It'll make them happier as a human being.
You're quite notorious with having built Moonpig with quite a strong balance or harmony, work-life harmony. And you said that obviously you've worked long hours and you've had to fight fires when the company needed it, but the majority of the time you had relatively good, strong harmony, which then you applied to the rest of the team. You said that if people feel stressed, they're not going to be creative, and Moonpig is a very creative company.
Really, really important. You should always aim to be running your team 9 to 5, because then you've got some slack. But if you constantly run your team 9 to 9, well, you've got nowhere else to go, because there will be times when suddenly everybody needs to dip in and work hard. And if they feel as though that you've been reasonable with your expectations up to that point, they will do that. But if you're constantly expecting them to work, to treat the business like as if it's their own, it's not their business. They're not going to get the benefit of most of the proceeds when it sells. So you can't possibly expect them to have the same attitude to it as you have as a founder. But it's also very important that people get the chance to break off and go and rest in the evening. As I'm also very particular about people having other jobs in an employment contract. I categorically ban other jobs because I need them to go and do something else and rest their brain. I don't want them to leaving my job and starting another job. And that's even worse with work from home, where people have 2 or 3 jobs. Gets very blurred. I don't want any blurring that. You either work for us or just us, or don't work there at all. But it's the work-life balance is important. People are happier. They work better, more creative. Moonpig was a creative company where we came up with amusing greeting cards. How can you do that if you're being worked to the bone?
What are some other factors that contribute to this creative process or this creative thinking, creative environment?
I think you've got to be happy. If you're not happy, you're not going to be able to create much joy, are you? So creating an environment where people feel they enjoy being at work. It's a pleasant working environment. They're with people who respect them. They all get on. So the work environment is really, really important to productivity. If you have that kind of, and the one thing I never really tolerated was any sort of clock watching, disciplinarian type of attitude in management. Let someone go for that, but because I don't want that. We've all got responsibilities, and people have to be producing. But it's got to be a sort of a positive environment to work in.
So then, if someone wasn't hitting their targets, you're not taking a disciplinarian approach. You're taking what approach?
Well, I mean, the approach I would take is if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, we'd chat about it, see if we can find a solution. But ultimately, if you can't find a solution, you say, look, this is not the right job for you. You're going to be much happier somewhere else where you're feeling useful, because you're not that useful here. I mean, they should jump at that point before I have to push them. But people have to reach their own conclusions. People ultimately want to be useful. Nobody wants to turn up to work and feel as though they can't do it properly. So that's why when you promote people to the point of incompetence, what happens, in a lot of companies, people get promoted and promoted until they start screwing up. And they just sit there screwing up forever and ever after that. Well, that's stupid. You want to promote them to the point where they're doing the job well, but then they need to stay at a level where they're doing it well, not further up where they're at a point where they're constantly failing.
Going into the final chapters of this incredible conversation, zooming out a little bit and thinking more about entrepreneurship and what you've seen lots of entrepreneurs, you've invested in lots of entrepreneurs, you've been in the trenches yourself. What defines a good entrepreneur from a great entrepreneur?
Luck. Really. I mean, the difference between hugely successful businesses and successful businesses is, generally speaking, luck. And there are some geniuses out there, clearly, but there are also some really, really bright, talented people running businesses that never really get that far because they just didn't get a stroke of luck. You get good luck, you get bad luck. And you shouldn't underestimate the importance of being in the right place at the right time and just catching a wave. Sometimes you just catch a wave. And if you look back at a huge success and you think, yes, okay, I did that because I'm incredibly clever and smart, what'll happen is you'll take all that money and you'll go and start something else thinking you're going to turn that into gold too, and it doesn't. So I think it's one of the things that's underestimated. When you're asking people, why was your company successful, you can give a whole lot of reasons why it was successful. But the one thing they will often not say is, well, we just caught a wave. And I think with Moonpig, I'll be the first to admit, it was the right idea for the right time, and we just, we caught a wave. We were in, and a lot of that was good fortune. I started Moonpig at a time that I'd just come back from Russia. I wanted to start a business. I mean, yes, the internet thing was starting, but I was lucky that I wanted to start a business at the time that internet retail was just beginning. So there was a bit of an open goal, and a few things came right. But the difference, I think, when it comes to very successful entrepreneurs, my own belief is entrepreneurs are driven by one of two things. They're driven by passions or they're driven by demons. A passion is they just love what they do and get excited about it, and their enthusiasm overflows, and that is the best way to be. And someone who's driven by demons is driven by demons because their dad was bankrupted when they were 13 and they were pulled out of school and they've never forgotten that, and they're determined never to be in the same situation again, or because they were at school and someone once said to them, you will amount to nothing. And that slight has meant that all they've ever really wanted to do is to be successful, then go back to an old boy's day and say, look at me, I'm successful now. And the teacher, of course, doesn't remember who they are. But, that sort of thing. So the people who are driven by, if you're driven by passion, you're probably going to be more successful. You're certainly going to be happier doing it. But the decision making, I think, is one of the most important factors in success. Is people's willingness to take bold decisions and go with it, and they've got to be bold, considered decisions. Because if you're right 60% of the time and you take a lot of decisions, you'll be successful. If you're right 49% of the time and you take bold decisions, you're probably not. But you don't have to be right all the time. You don't have to be right. You can make mistakes.
Which parts of the process were you most passionate about?
I enjoyed all of it. I enjoyed the whirring, clanking machinery side. I enjoyed designing a factory. I enjoyed building a team and working with them. Of course, it's wonderful working in a company where things are growing and growing. There were lots of downtimes. I mean, there were lots of times when we thought we weren't going to make it, and that's quite tough. I think what I've not been through is a period of decline, and I think that would be very, very hard. Running a business where your product has kind of passed its peak and it's slowly slipping downwards and there's not much you can do about it. I think that would be very tough.
There's a lot of luck in catching the wave, but there is a skill of identifying a wave.
You've got to seize an opportunity when it comes along, definitely. And some people, that comes back to decision making, the ability to say, do it. Let's just do it now and take a decision. And some people just think about it, discuss it, pontificate, but never do it. Because most of those people never set up a business. They talk about it. Oh, I'm thinking about doing it. They're always thinking about it. They never actually give up their job and just launch into it.
So now, as an angel investor, you're assessing the entrepreneur's ability to be decisive and take the shot. given however much information they have, but then also you're assessing what the next wave might be. Is that right?
You can try and predict what the next wave might be, but generally speaking, you don't see them coming. I think what I look for in a business, first of all, you're looking at the entrepreneur, and you think, have you got someone who has got a good commercial sense? Now, I personally like someone who has. I like to go through their business plan, and I like to look at their financials as an indication of how they think. Because what I want to see is a very logical sequence in their financials of, if I spend, here are my assumptions. I assume that my average order will be this much. And I assume that if I spend this much money on acquiring a customer, there'll be a flow of, this is how much money I will spend on marketing. That will result in this many customers. And that will then flow through to the gross margin, which will then flow through to the net profitability. And so there's a logical flow. And what I see too often is I see a business plan where sales are there's just a thing that says sales will increase by X% per year with no explanation of how. And the hardest thing of all in any business is growing sales. So I want to understand how you think you're going to grow sales. What are you going to do? What are you going to throw money at? And you might not have been able to get any evidence yet, but you've got to have some sort of hypothesis that if I advertise on Facebook, it might cost me X pounds per customer. And I want to see that you've thought through that logic. I also, by the way, want to make sure that you wrote it, not somebody else, because what quite frequently happens, I ask someone a question about their financials. Oh yeah, well, I didn't write this actually. A friend of mine who has an MBA wrote this. Well, that doesn't help me because he's not in your business. So I want to understand how you think, not your mate who helped you out a bit. So that's when it comes to that, it's got to be right. I want to understand, what evidence have you got that people want to buy what you want to buy? And secondly, what evidence have you got that they will pay what you're proposing to charge? Then I want to understand how much money you're going to make. And then I want to understand how big is the opportunity. And so those are the things that I tend to look at. And it's same applies pretty much to every business.
This has been brilliant. Last couple of questions.
Yeah.
You said in the past that the only way to protect an idea is to be the best and the biggest.
I'd say the best way to protect it, because people get slightly caught up with intellectual property rights. Now, if you're developing a drug, that's really, really, really important. There are very few businesses where intellectual property makes a difference. Because just because you've got a patent on something doesn't mean to say that there isn't another way. You've proven that there's a market for this. There might well be another way of achieving the same thing, and then you're stuffed. So I think the best thing to do is to be the first, be the best, and get there first. That's what we did with Moonpig. I don't think we were entirely the first, actually. There was a small company that was doing something similar before, but they just weren't very good.
This has been fantastic. Thank you so much. The closing tradition is, because you've been so generous with your time, if you assume that this is listened to by lots of entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs and generally ambitious people, is there anything that a community of those sorts of people could support you with at the moment?
Yeah, come skiing in Wiltshire. Not really. But that's not the. I think I've kind of done my time, and I when I was starting out, a lot of people were very helpful to me with advice, which they gave very generously, and I get a lot of satisfaction. And if anyone can learn anything from my mistakes along the way, then I'm very, very glad to share them.
Is there anything that you'd hope entrepreneurs did more as a community of people?
I think the entrepreneurial community is actually very, very good at sharing. It's very collaborative, more so than many other communities. And that's the one thing that I've always felt, if there's a tribe of entrepreneurs, it's a great tribe to be a part of. A lot of like-minded souls who are very happy to share their time, share their experience. I think maybe that comes from the fact that being an entrepreneur on your own can be quite lonely, in the sense that you're the only person in the company who can be fretting about the fact that you can't pay everybody's salary by the end of the month, because probably not something you really want to share with the rest of your staff. So being able to share that with other people in the same boat is quite important. And also that although we're all entrepreneurs, the fact that I'm selling greeting cards and someone else is selling knitwear means we're never going to compete. But we have a lot of similar problems, and that's perhaps one of the great things about being an entrepreneur is you are part of a community, and there are lots of organisations like Founders that bring those people together. That's that's really quite inspiring and a great fun to be part of.
Well, you've inspired me, and this has been an extremely fun conversation. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.